And as they come in, you should be able to see that I've started the recording. That was a feat in itself. Wow, honestly, new technology. Please feel free to keep your cameras on if you want, but switch them off if you don't want to be seen. And as I've already said, please ask questions using chat or hands up, and someone will make sure that I see that question. And please remember that all views and questions and comments are welcome, because it will be a long session if it's just me that's chatting. And I can chat for a whole hour, but I think that would bore everybody here. So it's good to have some kind of interaction. So please feel free to ask any questions. So this week has been about changing the conversation around poverty, and I wanted to give these images because when we talk about poverty or low income households, the perception sometimes does not meet the reality. So the perception that a lot of people have is about rundown urban areas, and it's very evident that people are struggling financially in those areas. However, the reality, especially in a place like Aberdeenshire, that's a large rural area, is that the challenges for people living in a rural area mean that with low income, they are having some difficulties. Most of our people who live across Aberdeenshire that live in poverty or low income households, most of them are actually working. They're not unemployed. The work that they can access because of our transport issues and childcare sometimes is around the local area, so isn't always well paid or sustained. We all know how the cost of living in a rural area can be a lot higher than some of the towns and urban areas. And we don't always have the choice around broadband providers or energy suppliers. So although Aberdeenshire on the whole looks like it's an affluent area, we don't really have any poverty. We've only got a couple of areas of deprivation, and we've got beaches, and sometimes it's very romantic to think about a rural area. The reality for low income households is very much if they don't have a car, if they don't have money for transport, if there isn't any childcare around, then they are struggling, and most people are working and just trying their best in a really difficult time, not just about COVID, but prior to COVID as well. So I just wanted to use those images because our perception isn't always the reality, and what we see and our views on people, they need to be challenged, and we need to change the way that we maybe have a conversation around this agenda. I thought this quote was really important, and it's right. We don't learn from talking, we learn from listening to people. And the importance of listening to those with lived experience is, as I said earlier, decision makers and those that make policies and make decisions that affect people living in low income households, they only know what they know. So if they have never experienced any of the challenges that people living in Aberdeenshire have, then they won't be able to put that into policies. It won't be an informed decision that they're making. So by talking to people with lived experience, the challenges around access and services, and as I've already mentioned, affordable childcare, the long journeys that they have to long, complicated and costly journeys for employment or even shopping, the level of inequalities around living in the remote and rural areas, if we don't have an understanding of that, and the challenges people living in those areas with limited income has, then we won't be able to make the best decisions for them when we're changing things. And one of the recent changes that happened prior to COVID was around the transport infrastructure. Buses changed, and all of a sudden a few of the families that we were working with couldn't get to work anymore and had to give up their job because there just was no way that they could get to the location that they needed to, or the time of the buses had changed, so they could no longer do shift work. And that was, although we did lots of consultation around the change in transport routes, those issues didn't really come up. And if they had, then there might have been another way that we could have done it. We could have put on link transports into two hubs. We could have maybe looked at things slightly differently. But sometimes we don't know the effect that's had on people that are living with these challenges in our rural communities until we've made the decision. So we want to be listening to people with lived experience before we make decisions. And people who are living in low-income households in this area, they want to be part of the solution. They want to have that conversation with us, and they don't want to be seen as the problem, as it's their fault that they're in that situation. They want to do their best to make sure that the impacts are positive for everybody. And that is why we need to not just hear, but really listen to what these people are saying. In Aberdeenshire, we made a commitment that we would listen to people with their lived experience. And it started back in 2017, where we commissioned a research project, the Child Poverty Action Plan and Action Report is part of a duty that's been placed on the local authorities and NHS boards by the Scottish Government. There is a duty that we have to reduce child poverty levels across Scotland by 2030. So in Aberdeenshire, because of our rural nature, a lot of the challenges and a lot of the poverty is hidden, but the experience of families throughout Aberdeenshire is different. So if you live in Braemar, that's completely different to if you live in Banff, to you live in Stonehaven. So we commissioned some research from the Poverty Alliance to give us an indication of what life is like out there across Aberdeenshire in these different communities. And part of that research was to contact low-income households and get their views on what should be in an action plan, what should we be changing, how can we make sure that going forward we are supporting everybody, not just the council, but our wider partners are putting in the right support at the right time to improve people's lives. And that research was really interesting from our point of view. We thought that people would want to come together in focus groups. The researchers had used focus groups before, had engaged with different communities, have got a really good track record of having conversations around this agenda and engaging people. But in Aberdeenshire, they find that really difficult, that to pull people together. One, because of the geographical spread of Aberdeenshire, but also people weren't willing to come face to face with folk. They didn't want to be identified to other people in their community. And it didn't matter how big that community was. We could do it on an area base. There just was not that willingness to come together. What there was a willingness to tell their story and to be involved in the research on a one-to-one basis over the phone, having chats. It wasn't online chats like we do now, but definitely one-to-one interviews and over the phone. And what they found was they engaged with more people who are in work and were suffering in work poverty. And we knew from our stats that that is the biggest client group across Aberdeenshire. It's those that are in work with more than 2 children, and sometimes it's if they've got a disability as well, that are more likely to live in poverty in Aberdeenshire. So they found the views, they were very willing to tell their stories. They wanted to be part of producing other strategies and action plans. They wanted to have a lead role in developing some of the projects and interventions that we were talking about to help them reduce child poverty across Aberdeenshire. So they really wanted to be a partner in that development. However, when we asked them how they wanted to be engaged, they did not want to be part of a face-to-face forum. The experience that they had had was that people saw them differently just because of their income level. They felt that people did not treat them respectfully, did not listen to them. They had access to services. If they had a negative engagement with that service, that has affected if they are going to ask for help in the future. So a lot of them were scared. They were scared that people would see them as failures, that they weren't looking after their kids properly. They were scared that people thought it was their fault that they were in that situation. And we know that people that are having a really tough time, it's usually a change in circumstances that have brought them to that situation. Nobody chooses to live in poverty as a lifestyle. Nobody aspires to do that. It's things that have happened to these people along the way, a loss of a partner, their job has had to reduce hours, the increase in housing costs, the increase in childcare, a lot of the factors around people finding themselves in a challenging situation is not of their own making, but they felt that people would think that. And living in a small rural area, they didn't want anybody to identify them, not just because they felt they would be judged as parents or providers for their kids, but they didn't want their kids to be bullied, harassed, or identified in any way because they felt their kids were having a hard enough time and that would just make it worse in the community. And it was very strong views that people had around this. And in 2017, that was a bit concerning that we were still in a society where people didn't feel comfortable in their own community and felt that shame and they felt like they were a failure, and that was society putting those pressures on them. So what we did was we took that on board and we developed a online forum, which has had its challenges because finding a platform that's safe, that is confidential, that people can use was quite difficult at the beginning. Now we're used to Zoom and Teams and online forums and having a chat, but when we were looking to develop this, there wasn't any online forums at that time. It was all face-to-face. So we had to think very carefully about how we could engage. And because there was such a fear about people being identified, not only did we give them a safe place to have that conversation, but we also gave them different names. So nobody, apart from one person, Agnes, who was recruited to support them, would know who their real identities were. And that way they felt safe to give their views over. And the online platform, the way that it works is we post questions for them and they answer that in a chat room. However, this is open 24/7. It's not, therefore they can come in whenever they want to have that. The flow is not the same as what you would get on other social media platforms. There's time for people to think about what they're going to put down. There's the worker doesn't interfere in that conversation. They are allowed to say whatever they want. And it's developed as a very supportive forum for the people that are part of it, but it's also gave them the opportunity to be able to give views without someone like me with a community learning background going, so what do you mean by that, and how did it really affect you, and ask follow-up question after follow-up question. It's actually given them some headroom to say, yes, this is my experience and this is my story, and actually tell it in a way that's more accessible to them and at a time they want to do it. We've got a lot of working parents who do shift work, so if they want to come in at 2 o'clock in the morning and their kids are sleeping and they don't want to go to bed yet, they can go onto the platform and see what the question is and give their view over that. When we were Agnes recruiting families, we talk about being community champions. So it's not just about their views on a particular topic or a particular service. It's about getting the views of their family and friends and the wider community. And that way they have a more empowered role and they are having conversations about these issues that it's, I want to say normalising, but that's not the right word, but it's just a everyday conversation about how things might have to change because so many people are struggled, or a particular service or a particular issue that we're having. So we have this forum's only really been in operation since the end of January this year, so it's very new for people, but we've had a number of successes that's came out of that forum already. So people take part in the forum for lots of different reasons. Some people want to get the support of others and to reduce some isolation because they do feel a bit isolated and don't want to talk about the challenges that they're facing with other people because of the stigma that they feel. So each family that comes into the project, they have access to Agnes, who supports them to access services, to increase their confidence and to feel valued and not invisible. And during COVID, this was a pretty key role because people, some of our families find that really a challenging time. And in fact, a number of the families came off social media altogether because they just could not cope with all the information that was coming their way. And there was a lot of, they were scared and anxious, and some of them already have mental health issues. So they had came off. So Agnes speaking to them on a regular basis and making sure everything was okay and that they had everything they need was a lifeline for some of them, and it helped them feel that they were part of, they continued to be part of a bigger support group. So that's one of the quotes from one of the lived experience families, just showing their appreciation for the work that Agnes does. We recruit families from across Aberdeenshire. So within the forum, we have people who are living in rural areas, remote areas. We have people who live in some of our towns. We cover the whole of Aberdeenshire from Lornskirk up to way past Portlethen. Port Lebanon and up to Port Soy, across to Braemar, Ballater. So we cover the whole of Aberdeenshire, and we do that on purpose to make sure that each area is represented, because we have different challenges in those areas. We also have families that some are lone parents, some are two-parent families, some families are they've got a low number of children, two or less, and some families that have larger numbers of children, up to 6, 7 children within their families. We have families who have experienced domestic violence. We've got families who've got mental health issues. The majority of them are actually working. And we have families where they've either got a child that has a disability or they are disabled themselves. We've got young parents, older parents. We've got households that have 3 generations in them. So we have a wide range. We have people from the travelling community as well. So we want to have as many views as possible, and that way we can make sure that people, decision makers, are informed when we're going forward to develop things. So this has gave the people who are part of the forum an opportunity to meet people they would not normally meet, not just because of the geographical differences, but because of cultural differences, and differences in backgrounds altogether. So it's been really interesting seeing how all these different families are coming together and developing their own relationships and supporting each other with the knowledge and information that they have. And that is really powerful in itself. That makes people feel that they're not alone. That makes them feel that they have the confidence to share their story. And sometimes these stories are being shared for the very first time because they feel safe in that space. And I think collectively, they are changing the conversations that we're having, not just about service delivery, which is why we set it up in the first place, to make sure that we were putting in place things that was going to benefit not just families, but their wider community. But I think they're changing the conversation around the challenges people are facing now and in the future. So the forum has had a huge impact for decision makers. We are not at the stage that some of our participants feel comfortable enough to speak and be identified out with their forum. We have had a number of Zoom calls, which is really good for those that want to meet each other face to face, but they're not at that stage of being able to tell their story to decision makers. Therefore, we use their stories as case studies, and their views, we feed them back into services to improve service delivery. But we also use them as tools to raise awareness of some of the challenges that people are facing, and to use them for training to challenge perceptions of low-income families. And this was really important during the pandemic and during lockdown, when we were having to change services really, really quickly. Because we had the online forum there, we could go to them and ask them, right, this is going to be in it. What issues do you think that we need to look at? What kind of support do we need to put in place? And we did this just prior to lockdown, so we could we knew that there was going to be a possibility that the country was getting locked down, and how are we going to continue to support the most vulnerable in our communities was something not just the council but our partners and our communities were struggling with, and things were getting redesigned and put in place really quickly. So one of the suggestions was around free school meals. Because the schools were getting closed as well, we knew that families really struggle out with term time and holiday times to feed their kids. So that was going to be a long time if the schools were closed as well. So what are we going to do to make sure that these kids could still get a meal? And we looked at home deliveries, and we did that for a little while. We looked at asking people to come in to the schools, but you can't really come in to collect that because of the restrictions in that time. And the local voice group suggested that why don't you just give them the money, give them direct payments, and then they could buy the food that they need, or they can go online and get a delivery. And that's what we did. It was very quick, it was very effective, and for those families that were really struggling, putting those payments direct into their account really helped them at that time. And we haven't just done that during lockdown. What we have recognised is during the school holidays, we don't have the same support, and families are struggling. So those payments will continue out with term time right up until the new year. So the October holidays are starting next week, and we will make sure that direct payments go into these families' bank accounts so they can be supported over the October holidays, and it will be the same at Christmas. Because COVID did put a big focus on food access and services, it also gave us a focus of the challenges that we already knew low-income households faced, but it just heightened it all. Digital inclusion, access to food. So a lot of the views and a lot of the stories that the Lived Experience Forum has allowed us to change not just the way that we do things, but put additional support in place. And one of the other areas that they really struggled with was homeschooling. It raised awareness of the digital exclusion of some families, so we could put a digital kit and broadband in, but we also shared that with our wider partners who then were coming up with the same issue, so we could make sure that people that were most vulnerable could still be engaged digitally. So a lot of the views and the comments and the stories that they have shared with us have actually informed the way that we're going forward with service delivery. And it will continue because we will continue to listen to their experiences. So the forum is just one way of getting views and stories. And I think this session's all about how it's really important to listen to lived experience and to make sure that we are, if you're in an organisation like the council or a third sector organisation or even a private company, I think it's really important to get the views of people at the very beginning. We usually change a policy or strategy and then go out for consultation and ask people what they want. I think it's shown it's really better if we do that at the very beginning and we develop these changes together. That way we can limit any negative impact it has on certain areas of our communities across Aberdeenshire, because it's going to be different wherever you live. So getting those views, but doing it at a time and a way that suits them is really key. Otherwise, we're just going to get the same views if we're just using the same methods. So making sure that they have a space that it's okay for them to put their views across, and put in the clients and the local people first and our organisational needs second, because a lot of the time our consultations rely on people having to read very complicated documents, or they have to come together at a time that suits the organisation. So this forum has sort of put that on the head. run by them. We don't interfere with the conversations. We just post up questions, and it's a time that suits them, and it's a safe space for them to be upfront and honest about what their views are, which helps us to improve things. And I know there's lots of community groups that are looking to develop programs and projects to support their local community, which is great. But don't just ask the same people for their views. Try and have a look at other ways of engaging people, other groups that are out there. Social media has been really good for collecting information and views from people over the last wee while, but different people will have a different outlook, and I think it's just about embracing that, and that way you know your community a little bit better, and you have an understanding of what maybe needs to be put in place, or what you should be campaigning for in your area. And for local people, be brave, because I think they're extremely brave for telling their stories in the first place. Given the fact there's so much fear around and how people feel around the stigma, I think it's really brave. But I would encourage people to use their voice and let us know what is the best way to have that conversation with them. And if we can see the person and not their situation, then I think we would have a better knowledge and understanding of how many challenges different people have, and then we can put in place things that's going to support our communities now and in the future. So, have we got any questions? I'm going to stop sharing my screen, hopefully, so I can see people. She says, hopefully. Is there any questions while I'm trying to figure out how?
Yeah, how do you put that? How do you put that knowledge back into the local community? You have that knowledge, but the local community like addressing the issues as well. How do you put that information that you have back to local groups so they can assist as well?
That's a really good question. And before COVID, I was going round different community groups like community councils and community organisations, and talking about their communities, because I do have a lot of knowledge around not just the stats but who is living in your community. So we were doing that. At the moment, what we're doing is if there's particular issues around particular communities, we're using our community planning officers or our wider partners and passing that information on to them. But I'm happy to come and have a more focused discussion with community groups about what is going on in their area, because we do have voices right across Aberdeenshire, so we can give you information from who's living in your community in a confidential way that is going to support whatever you're doing. So I'm quite happy to do that. It had just started when lockdown happened, and I think we're really good at communicating to service providers and the wider partnership, but I think you're right. I think there's a gap there for communities. We are doing some training with parent councils that's going to happen in November right across Aberdeenshire, but there is a gap there around the wider community. So I'm happy to take your views, or I'm happy to come along and talk to anybody. I'm really sorry, I can't stop sharing this screen for some reason. So is that okay? Did that answer your question?
Yeah, that's fine. That helps a lot, actually. I'm very aware, being a member of the community council and have been for many years, that you really do need a focal place in communities and know what's going on, because Otherwise, we don't know where our issues are.
Yeah, and I'm happy to come along and speak to community councils. I had some invitations prior to lockdown, and it's just about picking that up again. So if you want me to come along and just, I've spoken to the Rotary and organisations like that as well. So if you want to either ask me or Agnes, then we're happy to come along and engage, because I do think it's important to get those stories to the local community as well as decision makers.
You've got a busy job because there's 65 community councils in Aberdeenshire.
Yeah, but somebody tells me that you do come together now and again for things, so we could maybe cluster you together to do it. So, and not all community councils will see this as something they want to explore either. So, and that's what I've found. Not every area has this is a priority, although it's a priority for me, and I think everybody should have it as a priority.
Well, absolutely. But we have community council forums, and I think that would be an ideal time for you to engage.
That would be good. Yeah, I can do that. Oh, and
Thank you.
I've managed. Look at that. See? I told you I don't like Teams. Everybody else likes Teams. Right. So any other questions? So Kevin, you were talking about your experience with the Social Renewable Advisory Board. Do you want to maybe say something about that?
Just backing up what you were saying was that we were asked to bring this focus group together for people who had lived experience along a range of kind of protected characteristics. So it was linked to equality and equity. And we did pull the focus group together, but not everybody was able to make the focus group. Some people were less comfortable in that setting. So we had one-to-one conversations with people afterwards, and they were much happier with that, and people spoke a lot more, and we still covered the same ground. We missed the interaction with people, but it was effective, and I think we did manage to gather information that way. I can see Michael's trying to come in, and I don't know if you can see.
Okay, no, I can't. So Michael? If you want to unmute. You're still on mute, Michael. There you go.
Hi. Sorry,
Hi.
it's not.
Sorry.
Hi, my name is David.
Oh,
and,
sorry.
I'm at my son. You must pardon me, because I'm at my son-in-law's, and this is my very, very first Zoom type experience. While I appreciate what you're saying and the efforts that you are making, you're talking about voice. It's not only the voice of the folk with the problem, if you like, the inequality, the poverty. The problem that we have in society, and I'm speaking as a community worker with about 50 years experience here, is that the voices of people have become separate, and we need to rejoin society in a variety of different kinds of ways. As I say, what I appreciate is your efforts to get the voices of local people heard. The problem that you have is that you are starting at a certain point in society. You are, in my words, making a move which is top down towards the people with the problem. We also need to be activating the people with the problem to give them voices where they come together and link locally with the local dynamic, the local community, and work up the way. And if you like, they meet you. We don't have a society which communicates very well. We live individually, and that is a fundamental problem that we have in society. We need to encourage people to speak, to have their own voice, and often in a community, I've discovered that that is through voluntary groups, developing a range of contacts. The volunteers develop their voice with the people who have the problem. They know these people, and that begins to get at the problem which you identified early, that people with a problem don't want to talk. They don't want to share it because they are living in a kind of cocoon within society. Now, we need to try and break that down. Now, it is quite doable. It's just that we do not work at it as a society. We live in separate groups, and village hall committees, community centres, they struggle with this problem of how to bring people together. And we've lost in community work, we've lost the way, because if I look at my work that I did in Stonehaven, we're back in the situation when I started, where you've got a hall which is rented by individual groups. We no longer have a process that brings people together. And I'm concerned about that lack of creativity. But the starting point is in villages, it is in communities where we need to re-engage and help a range of people to have a voice, not just those with inequality.
No, I do agree. I do think we need to have better conversations with each other and have that link within our communities and start respecting each other a little bit more, being kinder to each other a little bit more, and just having that connection within our communities. Some of the lived experience, the people who are on the forum, some of them have had the confidence to go and use their voice elsewhere and to feel valued to the extent that they are now ready to volunteer within their communities. So I do think there needs to be a range of work going on just to pull that community back together, and for everybody, not just for the communities to embrace everybody else, but for those who are feeling a bit marginalised to feel that the confidence that they will be included and they will be valued in their community. They just have to take that step.
Yeah.
And
it's a fundamental problem, because people that I've spoken to, by the time they leave school, they feel that they fit in a certain way into society. You're either a high achiever, you go into higher education, you get hires, and you go into university. But many people leave school, and by that point, they've got a label on them, they feel, of not very bright, not fitting in. And they live with that label the rest of their lives. We have to find ways of breaking into that. And a system of lifelong learning needs to be much more strongly embraced in this country. We've devalued it over the last 15 or 20 years, lifelong learning, and we need to get back into it. People I've seen who've made changes have incrementally worked their way out of poverty, and often mums in families have done this by building up their further education in bits and pieces, using, for instance, the Open University. And gradually, over a period of 5 and 10 years, I worked in Fife, I saw this happening. People gradually added in the ability to make a change in their lives. And during that process, their voice got stronger and stronger, and their confidence grew and grew. But it is a very, very difficult problem, because it's deep down inside people.
yeah, it's very complex, and it's going to take a long time for people to feel that they have a strong voice no matter where they are. And I think as a society, we need to just change that conversation. And I think that's what Challenge Poverty Week this week's been all about. And we've had a really good sessions around people with lived experience over the week, so that your voice is getting stronger. But it's also about us challenging our perceptions, and how do we make sure that we do respect everybody and we are more inclusive, because we need to widen our horizons a little bit.
Absolutely.
So thanks for that. Is there anybody else? And you are talking to, I know there's a number of community workers that are on this call today. So you're talking to an audience that understands where you're coming from. So is there anybody else that has a question or a comment?
Annette, I'm just going to comment there. Just, it's Caroline here. So not to do with the point that David raised, really. it's quite spooky. He could be describing me. I've never really sort of opened up there, but just as he hit that point about living in poverty when you're younger, leaving school with teachers and etc. telling you that, you know, you're not going to be able to do that because you never get the grades, all of that negative, and you just believe that yourself because that's what you hear. And then you work your way up and you do various jobs. And it's taken me probably 30 years to get where I am now. And I have used the Open University, and I got a degree in, 2017, I got my degree after having come out of school with, I think, one qualification. So you're right, and it is a challenge and it is a struggle. And you get there and the support isn't always there. And I do wish sometimes that there had been more support, like Annette and Agnes are trying to put in place, just to give us that little connection to get going. That's something we never had. I didn't think I was going to share that this morning, so thanks, David. There we go. Who knows what's going to come out in these sessions.
Thanks very much, Caroline. And I do think it does take a long time, you know, to stop believing what people have told you when you were younger, because that's really powerful. So thanks for sharing that story. So anything else? Any other comments? No?
Yeah, I'd like to come back on the, well, one of the problems about our communities is that we've got such a large geographical area with Aberdeenshire that we're losing a lot of that localism. And as you said, you came and talked to the not the Probus, the Rotary. Well, fine, you spoke to the Rotary, and then you've informed the Rotary. But the Rotary don't have a remit to tell the Community Council about that.
Yeah.
And unless we have a kind of focus in our communities that is really respected, and people have a network within that local area, that we feel that these things don't get addressed. I mean, now we've got COVID-19, people are really jumping up to help. I mean, we've got food banks mushrooming around because people see the need. But if the need's not well known by the local community, it won't get addressed.
Yeah, I do think that we need to have those structures in place, because I do agree with some of the comments that have already been made about where it's not just about the geographical area, but we're fragmenting our communities. So it's the same people that are doing the volunteering and developing things in their community all the time, and they are doing their best. But if they're not supported by the wider community, or they're not informed about what other things is going on, then it's just going to make their lives a bit more difficult. So it is about pulling all that together. And I know that some of my colleagues that are on the call with a community learning background try and bring communities together, but maybe what we need to do is ask the communities and ask people like you, well, what is the best way of doing that? Because we're obviously not getting it right. We're not getting to the people who are working really hard in their community.
I haven't seen a community worker at a community council meeting in Stonehaven for 5 years. And surely that you're going to nominate some organisations effectively being the hub of the community. And if that one gets neglected, then there's not a real feeling of community.
Yeah, and I think what we need to do then is have a look at how we can engage our communities better than what we're doing at the moment. And we can take that away. And if you've got any ideas how we do that, then that's great. Kevin, do you want to come in?
Well, I was just picking up on, I mean, I am a community worker in Aberdeenshire Council, and picking up on some of the stuff that we are trying to do just now is, which as a team, we're a small team, but the point that Ian's mentioned about locality, we are trying to do neighbourhood work and have a neighbourhood focus. So Martin's on the call here, and he's involved in the Community Works project in Banff and Macduff, which has been funded through Tackling Poverty, and it's looking at that whole issue around about child poverty. And very early on, we got lots of stakeholders together to talk about that. And folk said from the beginning, children are only poor because the family's poor. So it's not child poverty, it's just poverty in general. But people were also looking at how do we build connections in the community? How do we get more kind of grassroots community activity there as well? And that approach is an approach we are taking in different places. And that's a long-term process. When we're going in to do that, these communities need to know we're going to be here for 15 years. We're going to see this work through. We're going to keep supporting it. And gradually, people get more and more involved. So, you know, Martin's got local people looking at childcare and childcare provision and what that looks like and what that could look like locally. Now, we're hoping that as that develops, these people's voices, confidence becomes much stronger and they become spokespersons for that issue in their community, and they go on and do other things. But it starts linking these disparate kind of people in the community, because this affects the whole community. It affects social cohesion. It affects everything in the community. So we've got to try and locate it in neighbourhoods and make it something that's, you know, everybody's concern. And one of the things I've heard coming back a lot from furlough, that experience of people, is people who maybe are a bit just used to live in their communities and weren't necessarily always part of it. They've seen lots of things in their communities that they were unaware of before, because they've looked a bit more closely at it. And I think there's a willingness of the wider community to get involved and be positive about this as well. So as a community worker with a tiny wee team, I think neighbourhood work is one of the ways that we address this, about this whole thing about giving people a voice and linking into people and going where they are, basically.
So there is a lot of work to do. It's complex, but I think there is a willingness, and I think if there is a positive thing that's came out of COVID, it's focused on how we need our communities not just to be resilient, but to pull together. And I think there's a lot of work going on about making all those different links and strengthening those relationships, not just with our communities, but with partners that are there as well. So I do think that it's a starting point and we need to move on. And this week was all about changing that conversation. But for me, it's not about a week of changing that conversation. We should be changing it all the time, and we should be challenging perceptions, and we should be developing better links so that everybody's informed and we can move forward together. So I'm just looking to see, Kevin, I take it your hand up from the last time. You don't want to come in again, right? So I'm looking to see if there's any other final comments, any final questions. And you have to be patient with me because Zoom is not my forte. Other people are like, oh yeah, we love Zoom. I can't see what I'm doing in Zoom, but nope. Can't see anything. So with 2 minutes to go, then I'm going to say thank you very much for your participation today. It's much appreciated, and thanks for the conversation that you've had with me today, because that's informed me going forwards, gave me some food for thought. Certainly will be making sure that we connect with the communities a lot better than maybe what we're doing. And if anybody wants me, I can talk almost for an hour all by myself. So if anybody wants me to come along and talk to any of your community groups or your community council, then feel free. After today, you'll get the slides and my contact details. So feel free to contact me, and I'm happy to come along and have more conversations with you. So thanks very much for your participation, and I wish that you have a good Saturday. So bye.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye. Thank you.
Thank you.
Now, how to end conversations.
And now, do you give me the host map so I can record the recording too?
Okay.
Please.
Wait.
I can't get the leave button up.
You will stay here forever,
Stay
Martin.
forever.
Yes, I
You're
know.
stuck.
So how do I give you the host? Oh yeah, there you go. There you go.
Okay, thank you.
So you can't leave us, Martin.
I can't. I don't know. My screen's frozen. So
Are you? Oh my God, Martin. That's
You'll just have to be here forever.
I thought that went well. It was really interesting to hear it a bit more from your team's perspective.
Yeah, my big team.
Aye.
Yeah, me and Agnes. You never came in and answered any of those questions, Agnes.
Well, nobody asked me anything, but I could actually follow up your conversation, follow up to my kind of speaking. I'm thinking, it's a good linkage from this session. We can link into a, and maybe some people will think, oh, I never heard that session, but that will be better for me to. And if I will stuck and nobody asks questions, I will just say, what do you think, Annette, about this? So be ready, especially if nobody asks questions after the case stories. I'll ask, what do you think, Annette? How could we, so you will be there. Well, she's trying to tell this and that, so. Sorry, Annette, I don't know how the thing will go, but
It'll be fine.
the isolation, I only got few slides, so it could be finishing in 15 minutes. So
It won't, but there'll be a conversation. It'll be fine. Don't worry about it. Hey, Martin, it'll be
Aye.
fine.
It'll be fine. It'll be fine.
So can you leave us yet? No.
I think if I just close the window down, I'm going to be able to leave you. But
Right. Well, I'm leaving, and
Okay,
so that I
guys.
can go and get a coffee
yeah,
and then be ready for the next session. What's the next
And,
session?
the next session is isolation.
Isolation.
And I will be trying to put this recording.
Oh, I have to stop recording.